Welcome back to Nothing But the Truth. Joining us today is Rich Goldberg. Rich is a senior advisor at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, a seasoned national security expert, and former member of the National Security Council. Rich brings unparalleled insights into U.S. foreign policy. Rich is widely recognized for his expertise on sanctions, Iran, and Israel. From Capitol Hill to the White House, Richard has been at the center of many policy debates shaping America's role on the world stage. With Assad's regime's collapse and the shifting landscape of the Middle East, we're thrilled to have him here to break it all down. Rich, welcome to Nothing But the Truth.
Excited to be here. Thank you.
So before we get to the Middle East, I just must ask you, what is going on with the drones?
The way the US government has handled this question is completely outrageous. I mean, the fact that we cannot get our hands around simple answers of things that are flying over your house through the night sky is unbelievable to me. The fact that we have not taken one of these drones down so that you can have a pretty clear answer once it's down is amazing to me. There are a lot of companies out there with very innovative counter drone technology to very safely intercept these drones and bring them down. You don't have to fire a missile into the air, so to speak. There are companies out there that have little drones that fly up, follow the drone, capture the drone, and bring it back down.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's clear that if the government doesn't know who is flying these drones, then we are really in big trouble. So I'm assuming that they know who's flying them and they're just keeping it from us, which again isn't a great thing.
Yeah, and by the way, if the answer ultimately is we actually don't want anybody flying drones in the sky, it's not safe.
I think that is really ridiculous. The reason, explanation is that it's hobbyists, helicopters, and in some cases they've actually said stars, the size of automobiles. I mean, that's really ridiculous. How could they take us for such fools? This has to be something, obviously going on.
Well, I do want to be careful with all the different theories going around without absent any evidence. We had the few days of an Iranian mothership, going around, and everybody was looking for the mothership, and I don't think we found the mothership yet, and it doesn't seem to exist, at least not off the coast of the United States at the moment.
Okay, with that, we're going to move on to really your area of expertise, which is Syria. What are your thoughts on Syria? We've seen such a tremendous change in the landscape in the Middle East in the last 2 weeks, so quickly, with Assad's regime crumbling, Assad gone, Jolani now taken over, a person who was part of ISIS, then Al Qaeda. Now he's peace loving. Turkey is encroaching on the border, attacking the Kurds, who are presumably our allies, the United States allies. A lot going on there. Could you break it down for us and tell us your thoughts?
Yeah, important to remember, going back to basics, Syria has been Humpty Dumpty with a lot of bad policy options put together since the 2010s. After there was a moment where Assad could have been taken out, some sort of stability could have been formed with a new government that may have been more pro-Western, and the unwillingness of the Obama administration, of President Obama himself, to enforce his red lines on the use of chemical weapons allowed the Russians, the Iranians, Hezbollah to come and rescue Assad. We saw the rise of ISIS. We saw the caliphate, Turkish interests at play in trying to prevent the emergence of a Kurdistan on its border. The Israelis obviously having interests of preventing both the Iranians from building its munitions capabilities up in Syria, transshipment points for Hezbollah within Syria, and also the Al Qaeda or ISIS type link groups from building up their own forces on the border of Israel. Both of them threats to Israel in different ways. And so what we have seen now is the fall of Assad, very much linked to Israel's military success against Hezbollah. You have the combination of Russia being overstretched now for a couple of years because of the war in Ukraine. That was static. What is the dynamic element here that precipitates this very rapid fall of Assad? It is the ceasefire following Hezbollah being completely eviscerated within its leadership and strategic capabilities by the Israelis, while they also had been working to degrade the IRGC, that's Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps, in Syria itself. And we saw many strikes going on in Syria, not just in Lebanon. Now, the intelligence communities didn't see this coming. In hindsight, it makes perfect sense. The Russians, the Iranians, Hezbollah, those who prop up Assad are fully either weakened, decapitated, or overstretched and distracted. So it makes perfect sense for the Turks and the Qataris to allow their militias that they sponsor to have a timed movement to test whether or not Assad has become a house of cards and falls, and that's exactly what has happened. I don't know if they even expected to be able to march on Damascus that quickly. Perhaps thought that they would have a surprise attack and take Aleppo, retrench, and see what would happen next. And then suddenly, all these cities start falling on the march to Damascus. Defection from the military, people running away rather than standing and fighting. The use of weapons of mass destruction, chemical weapons, not employed by Assad. Assad fleeing in the end, seeing that he has no protection left. And obviously now you have the rise, the control of both the Turks and the Qataris through proxies in Syria. You have, as you mentioned, Jolani of a group HTS, formerly the Al Nusra Front, which is the Al Qaeda in Syria branch. And this is a person who, just a couple of years ago was Al Qaeda, and now wears a jacket and says he's a man of peace. I guess we'll see. I would have serious doubts and worries about the direction of Syria under control of somebody who has been aligned with Al Qaeda in the past. You might end up in a very much a Taliban type situation from the views that you see espoused. At the same time, you talked about the Turks massing on their border and empowering their backed militia to try to rout the Kurdish militias that we had partnered with previously in Syria. From Turkish interests, obviously, they have fought the Kurds in Iraq. They fought the Kurds in Syria. They do not want to see a Kurdistan emerge on their border. However, the Kurds are in charge of guarding ISIS prisons in northwest Syria. And if they get routed, if they have to run away, if they're killed, and the prisons are let open, ISIS leaders are going to be all out on the streets running wild, and they're going to want to compete with Jolani. And so you're going to see a rise in the radical extremism on the Islamic side, competition between a former Al Qaeda, or we'll call them Diet Al Qaeda now, Al Qaeda Light in Jolani, and ISIS officials who may want to retake territory and see a vacuum. The Israelis, meanwhile, watching all of this, saying, okay, on the one hand, Assad just fell. The Iranians have fallen in Syria. Hezbollah has fallen in Syria along with Assad. It's very good for Israel in some ways because it means Iran is extraordinarily weak. Another, part of their ring of fire that they have set up around Israel has fallen. So you have Hamas completely eviscerated in Gaza. You have Hezbollah decapitated at a leadership level and degraded in southern Lebanon. You have now Assad falling, which means the Iranians have their militias in Iraq. That's sort of their fallback, their Alamo position now in the Middle East, and the Houthis in Yemen that continue to fire missiles and drones into the Red Sea and in Israel, and whatever capabilities they have left. But remember, the Israelis just a couple months ago took out the strategic air defense of Iran. So they're sitting with no real protection from a follow-on airstrike from the United States or Israel. So they're in a very weakened position right now in Iran. That's good for the Israelis, since their existential danger remains the Iranian nuclear quest and ambition to take over the Middle East to destroy the state of Israel. However, they can't allow Al Qaeda to sort of set up on their border and take positions in the Golan Heights across from Israeli territory. They can't allow Al Qaeda groups or whoever else pops up, takes control to get hold of Assad's chemical weapon stockpiles that were left, his missile capabilities, his navy, his tanks, his air force,
But has
is air defense,
just
all these things. So you see the Israelis, I'll wrap up. You see the Israelis taking their own unilateral action to defend their interests of the unknown, wiping out all of Assad's remnants of his conventional and unconventional military capabilities, and establishing new buffer areas inside Syria to protect themselves and ensure that any of these Al Qaeda type groups don't set up shop closer to the Israeli border. And one interesting side note of that is many of these areas, in fact, most of these areas where you see the Israelis move into Syria are Druze areas. And so you actually have a sort of a unification of Druze territory between that which is in the Israeli controlled Golan Heights and those within Syria, which is forming what could be a natural long term control by Israel, both for security purposes, fully legitimate under international law, I might add, since the fall of Assad nullifies the 1970s agreement of where the borders stood with the buffer zone, but also would be good for the Druze community to live under an Israeli flag.
Well, they just voted. The Druze community just voted to live under an Israeli flag. So you brought up so many different thoughts that I think I'd like to explore. So, firstly, if Israel has destroyed a lot of Assad's weapons, where are the weapons for Jolani going to come from? Number one, and number two, is it going to take them decades to build up a stockpile where they would be very dangerous for Israel?
Yeah, so when Israel's destroying our strategic level capabilities, guns, right? Just a rifle, grenades, other sort of light arms that they may already possess or that they're taking from Assad. Israelis aren't targeting those by and large, unless there's some massive stockpile warehouse that you can take out easily. So they're going to be armed. They can always smuggle in arms like that, as other groups do around the world within arms trafficking networks. But having no real state sponsor to provide weapons that they are manufacturing, the way that the Iranians would manufacture weapons and send them to Assad, send them to Hezbollah, whether these are drones or missiles, rockets, not having a Russian state sponsor with a military export infrastructure to provide air defense, et cetera, is going to be a game changer. So Jelani does not have access to those types of assets. The Turks are unlikely to provide major military support in that way.
Why?
They will have financial support.
Why wouldn't Turkey supply them? I thought that Turkey was very much behind them.
Turkey has the ability to supply them with light arms potentially, but they don't have a Russia or Iran type ability, except perhaps for drone technology, to be a main military supplier. They have the ability to provide them political support, financial support. Certainly, the Qataris are going to be a major source of income and revenue for the new Syrian government, and you're already seeing the Qataris sort of stepping out from behind the curtain and now establishing their embassy and making relations with Jelani more public. I think that was always there behind the scenes, but now coming out into the world. Of course, the Qataris back in the 2010s came under heavy pressure from the then Obama administration, amazingly, for financing al-Nusra at the time, the al-Qaeda front in Syria. So those ties are pretty close. But Israel is concerned about the strategic capabilities, making sure that they don't have a real standing army with conventional capabilities to go invade Israeli territory, to send missiles against Israel, air defense to protect their territory should airstrikes continue to be necessary now or in the future for smuggling, so that if you do see a state actor try to bring in some sort of heavier arms or strategic weapons, the Israelis hopefully would detect that on intelligence and would have freedom of the sky to go intercept those. If the Iranians continue to try to move smuggling into Syria to reconstitute some sort of territorial control with proxies, or continue to try to use Syria in some way amid the vacuum to have transshipment continue by land from Iraq over to Lebanon for Hezbollah. Again, the Israelis having pretty freedom of the skies to intercept whatever they see there going through Syria. The naval capabilities as well being degraded, and other, obviously the unconventional capabilities like chemical weapons, cursor chemicals, and actual stockpiles that may yet have been in storage. So that's the Israeli priority there. I worry more on the Turks on their border. I worry about what they are planning to do to the Kurds. Worry about the follow-on effect of the Kurds abandoning or releasing the ISIS prisoners. I worry what that means for the rise of ISIS again in Syria. And remember, we still have 900 or so troops in Syria at the Al Tanf garrison near the Iraq border with Syria. The oil, such as there is in Syria, remains largely under the Kurdish control areas. And I know President Trump, in the last time he was president, back in 2019, when he was negotiating with Erdogan on this issue, has still had concern for who would be in control of the energy resources to ensure they didn't get diverted for illicit purposes. That can be built up over time if Western interests are involved in the energy sector to as much as I think it was around 500,000 barrels per day at its height. Obviously, has cratered since then. A rounding error in the global energy market compared to many producers, but still something. So there's a lot of interest here for us to be wary of. And so I think when you saw President Trump do his Truth Social post and say, let it play out, don't get involved, I think that's prudent because we don't know exactly who Giuliani is yet. There are people making representations that he's a reformer. There are people like me who are far more suspicious and think he's the Taliban who's saying nice things until he's in charge, and then suddenly women are abused and you have a radical Islamic State on your hand that's allied with Al Qaeda. I'm very worried about a precipitous withdrawal if the Turks, force the Kurds or destroy the Kurds, or as a point of leverage, the Kurds release ISIS, and then we're right back to fighting ISIS in Syria with them plotting attacks against the West. So this is a complicated, dynamic situation, and the idea of not making any precipitous withdrawals, not committing anything quite yet, don't lift sanctions, don't send money, don't back people, ensure that our basic principles, our basic national security priorities are taken care of. We don't allow ISIS to reemerge. We don't allow bad radical actors to get control of chemical weapons or other strategic conventional weapons. The Israelis are doing us that favor largely in taking out those capabilities. But this is still evolving. I think we're going to have to put some pressure on Erdogan not to go after the Kurds in the way that he might want to. That'll be a subject to a negotiation, I'm sure. But we cannot allow those ISIS fighters to come out of those prisons. And then we're stuck there relitigating a fight that was already won 4 years ago or more.
So for decades, America has tried to sanction Iran, keep them at bay, prevent them from becoming nuclear. And now it seems like, is Iran just a paper tiger at this point? Are they still the biggest threat to the Middle East? It seems like they've been tremendously degraded. Hezbollah is basically gone. Hamas is gone. Their ability to get weapons, Syria is gone. Their ability for the land bridge to get weapons anywhere, gone. And they themselves have had their facilities have been taken out by Israel. So is this just a situation where Iran is very degraded and not really the main threat anymore, but now it's more in this Turkey-Syria region?
Well, Iran, in my view, remains the primary threat in the region and the source of instability. Syria is its own, small microcosm of chaos with various interests of all kinds of parties, including the Iranians, but also American NATO allied like Turkey, a major non-NATO ally, the Qataris, the Israelis with interests, all of these actors, the Kurds, all of this converging in this one area. Whereas on a regional picture, Iran is still the primary sponsor, the parent company of several terrorist organizations and militias. Many of those have been degraded by the Israelis, which means that the regional threat has changed dramatically in just the last few months. When you think about Hamas being degraded, Hezbollah being degraded, Assad falling, they still have major infrastructure and assets in Iraq. They obviously have the Houthis as a subsidiary with enormous capabilities being demonstrated to shut down international shipping in the Red Sea and launch missiles and drones at US forces and at Israel. And of course, Iran retains the largest missile force in the Middle East. And I think that's the number one thing to sort of fall back on. The ring of fire that Khomeini had created around Israel, his quest to take control of the Middle East, that is unraveling. And that's a good thing. It does mean that he is weaker. He is on the back foot instead of on the offensive. You know, the tables have turned dramatically in 6 months. However, he's still on the 1 yard line of a nuclear weapons capability, which would be a game changer for him, and he knows that, which increases the risk of some sort of a nuclear breakout in the foreseeable future if Iran's nuclear capabilities are retained and they continue to do secret work on nuclear weapons modeling, which we understand they're doing now, in addition to producing the fissile material, the nuclear highly enriched uranium that you need to put into the bomb. They obviously have the missiles to deliver weapons. They have the largest ballistic missile force in the Middle East still today. What the Israelis have taken out is very important to change the dynamic of Iran being either perceived as strong or perceived as weak, and actually strong or weak. What have the Israelis done? They haven't taken out all their offensive missiles. Iran could today, if they wanted to, fire another 300 missiles at Israel, maybe 500 missiles at Israel. They could fire ballistic missiles, they could fire cruise missiles, and they have a massive armada of drones that they could fire as well. What you saw back in April, a little bit what you saw a couple months ago, that could be repeated if the Iranians decide to do that. Now, one of the reasons why they might not decide to do that is because what the Israelis have taken out is a game changer for the Israelis to do more damage potentially, or for the United States to enter the picture and do damage. They cannot stop aircraft from coming into their skies with missiles and bombs to take out infrastructure and command and control and potentially leadership as well. They can't stop that at this point. The Israelis have destroyed their, what we say, strategic air defense capabilities. They still have some surface to air missiles. They have the ability to try to, take out aircraft with more amateurish capabilities, let's say, here in the 21st century, compared to the next generation type fighters that the Israelis are launching. The fact that the Israelis are also able to launch missiles outside of Iranian territory with their aircraft and the missiles that they have developed for those aircraft to launch into Iran. We think we saw that likely in the response to the April strike that hit a radar station originally in Iran. But now that they've taken out the air defense, the Russian air defense provided inside of Iran, they should be able to own the skies if they want to, and we should be able to do that as well, the United States, if we sought that. So the supreme leader now has to make his own calculations. He doesn't want to look weak. He obviously has a population that hates him. He's going through potential transition. He might die at some point. His president did die unexpectedly in a helicopter crash, and he has a president he didn't expect to have in the middle of transition planning. He had an uprising just 2 years ago where the whole country went to the streets, and they're right now in the middle of a new crackdown on women for not wearing their hijabs correctly, which could at any moment spark another uprising. He knows that. And he's very vulnerable to a follow-on airstrike. So would he actually dare the Israelis to come back for another volley? Would he give them the pretext to do that? I think that the likelihood of that has gone down dramatically, and we do see a different tone. A lot of people think you wouldn't have gotten Hezbollah to agree to a ceasefire disconnected from Hamas and Gaza without the Iranians giving that order. And the Iranians potentially giving that order both because of what Israel had done to them militarily and Donald Trump being elected, and the likelihood that Donald Trump's going to bring back maximum pressure and might give a green light to Israel to do more damage inside of Iran. So, on the nuclear side, they are amassing large amounts of high enriched uranium. They are conducting computer modeling for a weapon itself somewhere. They have sites that they still continue to deny access to. They have sites that they won't explain why international inspectors found traces of nuclear material in places that have never been associated with nuclear material before. So they have a program. It's still being kept secret. They haven't come open kimono to say, here's what we've been working on, take it away, or here's our full disclosure, we're not going to work on a weapon. So we are at a point where they have missile capabilities, they have a nuclear program. If they were to really lurch forward to try to cross the nuclear threshold, believing that that gives them the ace in the hole to deter any future conventional strikes inside their territory, out of fear that their retaliation would be a nuclear response, it's a pretty big incentive to go for the bomb, which means we now have our own decisions to take with the Israelis, especially with President Trump coming into office. Is this the moment where we will say we should just press our advantage? If the supreme leader has no clothes at the moment, if he has no air defense, and he might race forward to a bomb, should we destroy the nuclear infrastructure? Should we give Israel the green light to do so? I think we should. We should absolutely.
Do you think we
Yeah,
will?
go ahead.
Do you think we will?
I think that'll be a presidential decision, and that's something that I don't think President-elect Trump should comment on. I think he should keep the Iranians guessing, and I think he should keep all the options on the table, which he said he will. His focus, in my view, should be on restoring maximum pressure as quickly as possible to squeeze the regime of resources. That will open up additional options that still could avoid military action if the Iranians make clear behavioral changes and concessions that eliminate the strategic and existential threats that both we and Israel face. But it could also open the door for Israel to take advantage and press their own advantage militarily or through covert actions to remove the nuclear threat long term and remove the overall threat that we face from a regime that continues to sponsor terrorism to target the United States. I think let's remember this is a regime that says death to America, death to Israel. That's their belief, that's their ideology. They're building the weapons to try to bring that philosophy into a reality. They have tried to murder the president-elect multiple times through assassination plots. They're trying right now to murder senior officials who served him in the last administration. They tried to kidnap Americans from our soil. They tried to influence our elections. They've been funding, apparently, these college protests. This is a very bad actor. And so this isn't like, let's make a deal as far as there's a Western-oriented person on the other side of the table who's willing to make some kind of a real deal that they're going to enforce with you. That was the philosophy of the Obama administration that led to a disastrous nuclear deal that Iran had no intention of ever sticking to. And frankly, if they did, it was so good for them, it would give them legitimate pathways to nuclear weapons, which is why President Trump got out of it in 2018. So long as we're clear-eyed on the threat, the nature of the regime, and really, really focused on the threats that they are posing to our national security and eliminating those threats, I think we will come to the right policy conclusions.
Well, sadly, we are out of time, and that wraps up this week's episode of Nothing But the Truth. A huge thank you to Rich Goldberg for joining us today. Your deep understanding of Mideast geopolitics has been invaluable in today's discussion. And as the landscape is constantly shifting, and there's so many topics that we didn't even get to, like Jordan, for example, there's so much more to consider. I really hope you'll come back and do part 2 with Rich Goldberg. To our audience, thank you so much for tuning in to Nothing But the Truth. Don't forget to join us every Thursday night at 9:30 for another compelling conversation. That's 9:30 p.m. If you missed any part of the show or you want to revisit past episodes, be sure to follow us wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Trudy Stern, and remember, you'll always get the truth here.